The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the weathered trading post, dust billowing around its wheels like a living thing. Clara Brennan pressed her palm against the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs. This was it, the end of the line. Literally, Redemption Creek, Montana Territory. Population 47, according to the letter she'd received 3 months ago. 3 months since she'd answered that advertisement. 3 months since she'd agreed to become the mail-order bride of a man she'd never met. A man whose letter had been written by someone else because, as he'd explained in his single correspondence, his hands were too ruined for fine work. Clara swallowed hard, gathering her worn carpetbag and the small satchel that contained everything she owned in this world. At 24, she should have had more to show for her life. But after her parents died and her brother's wife made it clear Clara was no longer welcome in their Philadelphia home, well, the West had seemed like the only option left. "Miss Brennan?" The stagecoach driver appeared at the door, his weathered face kind. "This is your stop, ma'am." She nodded, accepting his hand as she stepped down onto the dirt street. The late afternoon sun was brutal, nothing like the gentle springs she remembered back east. Everything here felt bigger, harsher, more real somehow. "Your intended said he'd meet you at the trading post," the driver said, gesturing to the rough wooden building beside them. "Good luck to you, miss." Clara watched the stagecoach disappear down the rutted road, taking with it her last connection to everything familiar. Then she turned toward the trading post, smoothing her travel-stained dress with trembling hands. The door creaked open before she could reach it, and Clara forgot how to breathe. The man who emerged had to duck to clear the doorframe. He was massive, broader across the shoulders than any man she'd ever seen, with arms like tree trunks visible beneath his rolled-up shirt sleeves. Dark hair fell past his collar, and several days' worth of beard shadowed his jaw. But it was his hands that made her step backward involuntarily. They were scarred, heavily. Burns, she realized with a jolt. Old ones, the skin puckered and discolored, extending from his fingertips up past his wrists and disappearing beneath his sleeves. When he saw her looking, he immediately tucked them behind his back, his massive frame somehow seeming to curl inward. "Miss Brennan?" His voice was rough, like gravel underfoot. He didn't meet her eyes. "I'm Jacob Winters. I know I'm not what you expected." Clara's throat was dry. She'd been expecting someone rough. Yes, a frontier man. But this, he was like something from a storybook, a giant from a fairy tale. And those hands. "I won't hurt you," he said quickly, still not looking at her. "I know I look like I could, but I swear on my mother's grave I'd never lay a hand on you in anger. If you want to get back on that stage tomorrow and go back east, I'll understand. I'll even pay your way." Something in his voice made Clara's racing heart slow just slightly. He sounded afraid. This enormous man was afraid of her, or rather afraid of frightening her. She looked at him more carefully. Past the intimidating size, past the scars. His clothes were clean but worn. His boots were well-oiled. And despite his appearance, he stood with his head slightly bowed, making himself as small as a man his size could make himself. "Mr. Winters," she said, pleased that her voice came out steady. "I came here to marry you. I gave you my word in my letter." His head snapped up, and she finally saw his eyes. They were grey, like a winter sky, and filled with such naked hope that something inside her chest twisted. You're sure?" His scarred hands twisted together in front of him. "I have to be honest with you, Miss Brennan. I'm not an easy man to live with. I don't talk much. I work from dawn till dark most days, and He held up his hands, showing her the full extent of the damage. "I can't do a lot of fine work anymore. Can't even write a proper letter, as you saw." Clara stepped closer, studying those ruined hands. "What happened?" "Barn fire 5 years ago." His voice went flat. "I got the horses out, but the barn collapsed on me. I was lucky to keep my hands at all," the doctor said. "But my wife—" He stopped, his jaw working. "She said she couldn't stand to look at me anymore. Said I looked like a monster. She left before I even got out of the sickbed." The pain in his voice was so raw that Clara felt it like a physical thing. She understood then why he'd sought a mail-order bride. What woman in this small town would want a man so marked by tragedy? What woman would see past the scars to the man beneath? "My mother always said that hands tell the truth about a person," Clara heard herself say. "Working hands Honest hands are nothing to be ashamed of, Mr. Winters. Scars just mean you survived something that should have killed you. That takes strength. Jacob Winters stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. You're really not afraid of me, should I be? No. The word came out fierce, almost a growl. Never. I'd cut off these ruined hands before I'd use them to hurt you. Clara believed him. She didn't know why, but she did. Maybe it was the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes, like he expected her to flinch away at any moment. Maybe it was the careful way he moved, like he was constantly aware of his size and trying not to be threatening. Or maybe it was simply that she had nowhere else to go, and she wanted desperately to believe that this could work. Then I suppose we should proceed as planned, she said, unless you've changed your mind about wanting a wife. No. He took a step forward, then stopped himself. No, I haven't changed my mind. You're not what I expected either. Clara glanced down at her worn dress, her too thin frame. She knew what she looked like: mousy brown hair, unremarkable features, skinny as a rail. Her sister-in-law had taken great pleasure in telling her that no man would want such a plain, scrawny thing. I know I'm not much to look at, she said quietly, but I'm a hard worker, Mr. Winters. I can cook and clean, and that's not what I meant. He interrupted her, and this time he did look at her directly, really looked at her. You're pretty, really pretty. I thought you'd be older, maybe, or harder looking. Women who come west as mail-order brides usually are. But you, he shook his head, you could have your pick of men back east. I don't understand why you're here. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. No one had ever called her pretty before. I had my reasons for leaving Philadelphia, and I gave you my word, Mr. Winters. I intend to keep it. He studied her for a long moment, those grey eyes seeing more than she was comfortable with. Then he nodded slowly. The preacher's waiting at my ranch. It's about an hour's ride. If you're truly sure about this, I am. Then let's get you married, Miss Brennan. The wagon ride to Jacob's ranch was mostly silent. He'd helped her up onto the seat with surprising gentleness, his scarred hands careful not to grip too hard. Now he sat beside her, his large frame taking up most of the bench, guiding the two horses with practiced ease. Clara snuck glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Up close, she could see more details. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the small scar on his cheekbone that had nothing to do with the fire, the way his massive shoulders flexed as he worked the reins. He caught her looking once, and she quickly turned away, her face burning. You can ask, he said quietly, about the fire, about the scars, about anything. I'd rather you ask than wonder. It must have been terrible, Clara said. The pain, I mean. It was. His voice was matter-of-fact. But the worst part was after, watching everyone look at me different. Watching my wife pack her things and leave without a backward glance, having children run from me in town because I looked like something out of a nightmare. Children can be cruel, adults too. He was quiet for a moment. That's why I sent for a mail-order bride. Figured someone who'd never seen me before might be able to, well, look past it all. I'm looking, Clara said softly, and I don't see a monster, Mr. Winters. His hands tightened on the reins. Jacob. Call me Jacob. If we're going to be married, we should at least use given names. Jacob, she repeated, and I'm Clara. Clara. The way he said her name, low and rough, made something flutter in her stomach. That's pretty. Suits you. They fell into silence again, but this time it felt less awkward. The landscape rolled past, all golden grass and distant mountains. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that made Clara's breath catch. Here, Jacob said finally, pointing to a valley below them. That's home. The ranch was bigger than Clara had expected. A sturdy two-story house painted white with green shutters, a large barn, newer looking than the house, corrals and outbuildings scattered across the property, and everywhere cattle, hundreds of them grazing across the rolling hills. It's beautiful, she breathed. Jacob's face softened. It's been in my family for 20 years. My father built the original house and I added on after he died. The barn, that's the new one after the fire. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and Clara saw a small man in a dark suit waiting on the porch. The preacher, she assumed. Last chance, Jacob said so quietly she almost didn't hear him. You can still change your mind. Clara looked at the house, at the land, at the massive, scarred man beside her, who seemed to expect rejection at every turn. She thought about her brother's house in Philadelphia, where she'd been made to feel like a burden every single day. She thought about the future that had stretched before her there. Spinster aunt, unpaid servant, growing old in someone else's home. And she thought about the hope she'd heard in Jacob's voice when she'd said she would stay. "I'm not changing my mind," she said firmly. "Let's get married, Jacob." The ceremony was brief. The preacher, a kind-faced man named Reverend Matthews, spoke the traditional words while Clara and Jacob stood awkwardly in the small parlor. Jacob's housekeeper, a Mexican woman named Rosa, who'd been with the family for years, served as witness, her dark eyes warm with approval when she looked at Clara. When it came time to exchange rings, Jacob pulled out a simple gold band. His hands shook slightly as he slipped it onto Clara's finger. "With this ring I thee wed," he rumbled, his eyes fixed on her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. Clara repeated the words, her own hand steady as she placed the matching band on his scarred finger. The damaged skin was rough beneath her touch, but she didn't pull away. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Matthews said. Jacob froze. Clara could see the panic in his eyes, the uncertainty. He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to turn away. His lips barely brushed her cheek, the touch so light and quick she almost didn't feel it, but she felt the tremble in his breath, felt the careful, desperate control he was exercising. "Congratulations," the Reverend said, smiling. "Mr. and Mrs. Winters." Mrs. Winters, Clara Winters. She had a new name, a new home, a new life, and a husband who looked at her like she might disappear if he blinked. After the preacher left and Rosa served them a simple dinner, Jacob showed Clara to her room. It was upstairs, clean and neat, with a large bed covered in a beautiful quilt. "This was my mother's room," he said from the doorway, not entering. "I thought you'd be more comfortable here than in the master bedroom with me." Clara turned to look at him. "We're married, Jacob." "I know." His voice was strained. "But I won't. I don't expect you don't have to." He trailed off, his scarred hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. Understanding dawned. "You're not going to force yourself on me." "God, no." He looked horrified at the very thought. "I know this marriage is unconventional. I know you came here because you had no other choice. I won't take advantage of that. You can have this room for as long as you want it, as long as you need to get used to being here, to get used to me." Clara's throat felt tight. "And if I never get used to it?" Something flickered across his face. "Pain," she thought, "deep and old and well hidden. Then we'll work something out. Maybe separate bedrooms permanently. I won't force you into anything, Clara. That's not the kind of man I am." He started to turn away, and Clara found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Jacob, wait." He paused, his broad back to her. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being kind, for being decent." His shoulders slumped slightly. "That's a low bar, Clara. You'd be surprised how many men don't clear it." He looked back at her then, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Loneliness, deep, aching loneliness that matched the hollow space in her own chest. "Good night, Clara," he said quietly. "If you need anything, I'm just down the hall." Then he was gone, and Clara was alone in her new room, in her new house, with her new husband, who seemed determined to keep as much distance between them as possible. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt strangely disappointed. The days that followed fell into a routine. Jacob rose before dawn and was usually out working the ranch before Clara even woke. Rosa taught her the layout of the house, the routine of meals, the preferences of the household. Clara threw herself into learning, determined to prove her worth. She saw Jacob mostly at meals, where he was polite but distant. He answered her questions about the ranch, about the area, about his work, but he never volunteered information, never lingered after eating, never touched her, not even accidentally. It was like living with a ghost. A week after their wedding, Clara woke in the middle of the night to strange sounds. She lay in her bed, listening. There it was again, a low, pained sound coming from somewhere in the house. She slipped out of bed, wrapping a shawl around her nightgown, and followed the sound down the hall. It was coming from Jacob's room. The door was slightly ajar. Clara hesitated, knowing she shouldn't intrude, but the sound came again, a groan that spoke of deep pain. She pushed the door open. Jacob was in bed, thrashing in his sleep. Even in the dim moonlight streaming through the window, she could see the sweat on his face, the way his scarred hands clutched at the sheets. "No," he mumbled. Get out before... God, no, please, no. A nightmare. He was having a nightmare. Clara moved to his bedside without thinking. Jacob, she said softly. Jacob, wake up. He didn't hear her. His movements became more violent, and he cried out, a sound of such anguish that it made Clara's heart clench. She reached out and touched his shoulder. Jacob, you're dreaming. Wake up. His eyes snapped open. For a moment he stared at her without recognition, his breathing harsh and ragged. Then awareness flooded back, and he jerked away from her touch like it burned. Clara, he sat up quickly, running a shaking hand through his sweat-dampened hair. What are you doing here? Did I wake you? I heard you, she said gently. You were having a nightmare. He closed his eyes, shame washing over his features. I'm sorry. They come sometimes. The fire. I dream about the fire. You don't have to apologize. Clara sat on the edge of the bed without thinking about propriety. It must have been terrifying. I dream that I can't get the horses out, he said, his voice raw. I dream that I hear them screaming and I can't move fast enough. Or I dream that I go back for Emily, my first wife, and she's trapped inside and I can't reach her. Even though she wasn't even there that night. Even though she left me afterward anyway. His hands were shaking. Without thinking, Clara reached out and took one of them in both of hers. The scarred skin was rough and warm beneath her fingers. Jacob went completely still. Clara, it's all right, she said softly. You can tell me about the nightmares, about the fire, about anything. That's what wives are for, isn't it? To share the burdens. He stared at their joined hands like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. You're touching me. Is that all right? His voice was hoarse. No one's touched me willingly since the fire. Not like this. Not gentle. Clara's heart broke a little. She thought about this strong, kind man going 5 years without a gentle touch. 5 years of people flinching away from him. 5 years of being treated like a monster. She lifted his hand and pressed it against her cheek. Jacob made a sound low in his throat, something between a gasp and a groan. Clara, you don't have to. I know. I don't have to. She met his eyes in the moonlight. I want to. Your hands aren't frightening, Jacob. They're just hands. They've done hard work and survived terrible pain, but they're still just hands. He was breathing hard now, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Do you have any idea what you're doing to me? No, she admitted. Tell me. I haven't been close to a woman in 5 years, he said roughly. Haven't been touched. Haven't touched anyone. And here you are in my bedroom in the middle of the night, holding my hand against your face like it doesn't disgust you. It doesn't. It should. But even as he said it, his thumb moved just slightly, stroking along her cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. Jacob, she whispered. I should send you back to your room, he said, but he didn't pull his hand away. This isn't proper. We're married, but we're strangers, and you shouldn't be here. Why not? Because... His voice dropped even lower, became even rougher. I'm trying very hard to be a gentleman, to give you space and time and not rush you into anything. But having you this close, touching me like this, it's making that very difficult, Clara. She should have been frightened, should have pulled away. But instead she felt a curl of heat low in her belly, a curiosity she'd never felt before. What if I don't want space? She heard herself ask. Jacob's eyes went dark. You don't know what you're saying, don't I? She turned her head slightly, pressing her lips to his palm. The scarred skin was rough against her mouth, but she didn't care. I'm your wife, Jacob. Really your wife, not just in name. Clara. Her name sounded like a prayer and a curse. I'm trying to do the right thing here. Maybe I don't want you to do the right thing. Where was this boldness coming from? Clara didn't know, but she couldn't seem to stop herself. Maybe I want you to do what you want to do. What I want. He trailed off, his breathing ragged. His free hand came up, hesitating just before it touched her face. Can I? She nodded. His palm cupped her cheek with such gentleness, it made her want to cry. His thumb traced her lower lip, his eyes following the movement like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. You're so beautiful, he whispered. So small and delicate and beautiful. I'm afraid I'll break you. I'm stronger than I look. I hope so. He leaned closer and Clara could feel the heat radiating off his large body. Because I've wanted to kiss you properly since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach. Wanted to show you that I'm not just a scarred-up old cowboy. That I can be gentle. That I can make you feel... He didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he closed the distance between them and kissed her. It was nothing like the brief peck he'd given her during their wedding ceremony. This was slow and deep and searching, his lips moving against hers with a hunger that had been held back for far too long. His scarred hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss, while his other hand splayed across her back, pulling her closer. Clara melted into him, her hands finding their way to his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palms, could feel the barely restrained power in his large frame. He was holding back, she realized, still being careful, still afraid of hurting her. She didn't want him to hold back. She pressed closer, parting her lips in invitation, and Jacob groaned into her mouth. The sound sent shivers down her spine. His kiss became more demanding, more possessive, and Clara responded in kind, matching his passion with her own newly awakened desire. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing hard. Jacob rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "We should stop," he said, but his hands didn't release her. "I should send you back to your room before I forget myself entirely. What if I don't want to go back to my room?" His eyes opened, and what she saw there made her pulse race. Raw need, barely controlled. "Clara, if you stay, I won't be able to keep my hands off you. I'll want everything." "Then take it," she whispered. "Take everything. I'm your wife, Jacob. Truly." He searched her face, looking for any sign of doubt or fear. "Are you sure? Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be mine in every sense of the word." "I'm already yours," Clara said. "The preacher said so, before God and witnesses." Jacob's control snapped. He kissed her again, harder this time, more desperate. His hands roamed over her back, her sides, mapping the curves of her body through her thin nightgown, like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. "Tell me if I'm too rough," he murmured against her lips. "Tell me if I scare you. Tell me to stop and I will. I swear I will." "Don't stop," Clara breathed. "Please don't stop." What happened next was a blur of sensation. Jacob's calloused hands against her skin, the heat of his body pressed against hers, the low rumble of his voice murmuring things in her ear that made her blush and shiver at the same time. He was gentle despite his size, patient despite his obvious need, making sure she was ready for each new touch before taking more. And when he finally made her truly his wife in every way, Clara understood what all the whispered conversations between married women had meant. This feeling of completion, of belonging, of two people becoming something more than the sum of their parts. Afterward, Jacob held her against his chest, his scarred hands stroking her hair with infinite tenderness. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I didn't hurt you." "No," Clara said, and realized it was true. There had been a moment of discomfort, yes, but Jacob had been so careful, so attentive to her responses, that even that had been bearable. "That was—" "I know," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "For me, too." They lay together in the darkness, and Clara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Safe, wanted, home. "Jacob," she said after a while. "Thank you for not being a monster." His arms tightened around her. "Thank you for seeing the man instead." The next morning, Clara woke wrapped in Jacob's arms. Sunlight streamed through the window, and she could hear birds singing outside. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt truly content. Jacob stirred beside her, his eyes opening slowly. When he saw her, his face broke into a smile that transformed his entire appearance. He looked younger, happier, less burdened. "Good morning, wife," he rumbled. "Good morning, husband." He kissed her, slow and sweet. "I should get up. Work to do." "Can't Rosa handle it for one morning?" He chuckled. "Trying to keep me in bed, Mrs. Winters." "Maybe." His eyes darkened with interest. "Well, I suppose the cattle can wait a little longer." It was mid-morning before they finally made it downstairs. Rosa took one look at them, Clara's flushed face and mussed hair, Jacob's possessive arm around her waist, and smiled knowingly. "About time," the older woman said in Spanish-accented English. "I was beginning to think you two would never figure it out." Jacob laughed, a sound Clara realized she'd never heard before. It was deep and rich, and made her want to make him do it again. "Fix us some breakfast, Rosa," he said. "I'm starving." "I bet you are," Rosa said dryly, but she was smiling as she headed to the kitchen. The days that followed were like a dream. Jacob still worked long hours, but now Clara worked beside him when she could. He taught her about the ranch, about the cattle, about the harsh beauty of Montana. And every night he came to their bed, not her room but theirs now, and showed her new ways that two people could be close. Clara bloomed under his attention. The thin, mousy girl from Philadelphia transformed into a woman with color in her cheeks and light in her eyes. She learned to laugh at Jacob's dry humor, to tease him gently, to read the expressions on his scarred face that others might miss. And Jacob came alive in ways he hadn't been in 5 years. The nightmares came less frequently. The shadows in his eyes faded. He smiled more, laughed more, touched her constantly. Small touches, casual touches, like he needed the reassurance that she was real and she was his. One morning, about 6 weeks into their marriage, Clara woke to find Jacob already dressed and sitting on the edge of the bed, watching her sleep. The early dawn light filtered through the curtains, casting his features in soft shadow. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked, stretching languidly beneath the sheets. A flush crept up his neck. "A while. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be strange. I still can't believe you're real sometimes, that you're here, that you chose to stay." Clara sat up, letting the sheet pool around her waist. She'd grown less shy about her body around him, especially after seeing how his eyes darkened with appreciation every time he looked at her. "I'll always choose to stay, Jacob. You know that." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with his scarred fingers. "I do know, but I think part of me keeps waiting for the dream to end, for you to wake up one morning and realize what a mistake you made. The only mistake," Clara said, taking his hand and pressing a kiss to the damaged palm, "would be leaving you. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Jacob Winters." His grey eyes softened. "You say that now. Wait until you've spent a winter here. Montana winters can break a person's spirit. Then it's good I'll have you to keep me warm," she said with a smile that made him groan. "Woman, you're going to be the death of me." But he was smiling as he said it, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his entire face. "I have to go check on the north pasture today. One of the hands said he saw signs of wolves. Want to come with me?" Clara's eyes lit up. "Really? You'd take me?" "If you want. It'll be a long ride, and we'll be gone most of the day." But he hesitated, looking almost vulnerable. "I like having you near me, even when I'm working." "I'll get dressed," Clara said, already throwing back the covers. They rode out an hour later, after Rosa had packed them a lunch of cold chicken and fresh bread. Jacob had saddled a gentle mare for Clara, a pretty chestnut named Daisy, who seemed to sense her rider's inexperience and moved carefully. Jacob rode beside her on his massive gelding, a beast of a horse that matched its owner's size. He kept glancing over at her, making sure she was managing all right, his concern touching in its obviousness. "I'm fine," Clara assured him for the 3rd time. "Daisy is taking good care of me." "I know, I just worry." He paused, then added quietly, "I lost my mother to a riding accident when I was 12. She was an excellent rider, but her horse spooked and threw her, broke her neck." Clara's heart clenched. "Jacob, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "It's all right. It was a long time ago, but it made me cautious, especially about people I care about." The way he said "people I care about" while looking directly at her made Clara's chest feel warm. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of saddle leather and the soft thud of hooves on grass. The landscape stretched endlessly around them, all rolling hills and distant mountains, the sky so big and blue it made Clara feel both small and significant at the same time. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, "so different from Philadelphia." "Do you miss it? The city?" Clara considered the question honestly. "I miss some things, the libraries, the theater, being able to walk to markets and shops. But I don't miss feeling unwanted. I don't miss being a burden." Jacob's jaw tightened. "Your brother sounds like a fool. He just had a wife who didn't want me there. And I understand in a way. It was their home. And I was an extra mouth to feed after our parents died. The inheritance went to him, as it should have, and she shrugged. "I was just taking up space." "You're not taking up space here," Jacob said fiercely. "You belong here, Clara. This is your home as much as it is mine. More, even, because you chose it. I was just born here." She smiled at him, and he smiled back, and for a moment the whole world seemed to hold its breath at the perfection of it. They reached the north pasture by mid-morning. Jacob dismounted and helped Clara down. his hands spanning her waist easily as he lifted her from the saddle. He held her a moment longer than necessary, and she could feel the heat of his body through their clothes. "There," he said, pointing to the ground. "See those tracks?" Clara looked where he indicated and saw large paw prints in a patch of soft earth. Wolves? One, at least. Maybe more. He crouched down, studying the tracks with practiced eyes. "Big one, too. We'll need to move the cattle closer to the house, set up some night watches." "Is it dangerous?" "Can be, especially in winter when food is scarce. But right now they've got plenty of deer and rabbits to hunt. They usually only go after cattle when they're desperate." He stood, brushing off his hands. "Still, better to be cautious." They spent the next hour riding the perimeter of the pasture, Jacob pointing out landmarks and explaining the layout of his land. Clara listened, fascinated by how much he knew, how deeply he loved this place. "My father used to say that land gets in your blood if you're born to it," Jacob said as they paused on a rise overlooking the valley. He was right. "I could never leave here, Clara. This ranch, this land, it's part of who I am." "I wouldn't want you to leave," Clara said. "I'm starting to understand why you love it so much." He turned to her, his expression serious. "Are you? Really? Because I need you to know what you're getting into. This life isn't easy. The winters are brutal. The work is hard. We're isolated out here, miles from the nearest town. There are no libraries or theaters or fancy shops. Just land and cattle and the same faces year after year. And you," Clara said softly. "Don't forget you." Something in his expression cracked open. "You say that like I'm enough." "You are." She reached out and took his scarred hand. "You're more than enough, Jacob. You're everything." He pulled her close, right there on horseback, and kissed her until she was breathless and clinging to him. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were bright. "I love you," he said roughly. "God, Clara, I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," she whispered. "And you don't have to be terrified. I'm not going anywhere." They ate their lunch, sitting on a flat rock overlooking the ranch, Jacob pointing out the different pastures and explaining his plans for the future. He wanted to expand the herd, maybe build another barn, put in a proper vegetable garden for Clara. "We could have chickens too," he said. "Fresh eggs every morning, and maybe some pigs. Rosa's been asking for pigs for years." Clara laughed. "You're planning our whole future. Is that all right?" "It's more than all right. It's wonderful." On the ride back, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. Jacob eyed them warily. "Storm coming," he said. "We need to hurry." They were still an hour from the house when the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it had become a downpour, the kind of sudden, violent storm that seemed to come out of nowhere on the plains. Jacob pulled his horse close to Clara's. "There's a line shack about half a mile east. We'll wait out the storm there." The line shack was a small, rough cabin used by ranch hands during cattle drives. Inside, it was sparse but dry, with a small stove and a narrow bed covered with blankets. Jacob quickly built a fire in the stove, while Clara stood shivering by the door. Her dress was soaked through, plastered to her skin, and she could feel her teeth beginning to chatter. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Jacob said, not looking at her as he coaxed the fire to life. "You'll catch your death. I don't have anything else to wear." "Use the blankets. I'll turn around." Clara would have laughed if she wasn't shivering so hard. "Jacob, we're married. You've seen me without clothes before." He finally looked at her and his eyes darkened. "That's different. That was in our bed, in our home. This is us, caught in a storm, trying to stay warm." Clara's fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, clumsy with cold. "Help me." Jacob crossed to her slowly, his large hands surprisingly deft as he worked the tiny buttons free. His fingers brushed her skin, and despite the cold, Clara felt heat bloom wherever he touched. "You're freezing," he murmured, his voice rough. "Then warm me up." His eyes met hers, and she saw the struggle there, the desire warring with his innate protectiveness. "Clara, please, Jacob. I'm so cold." That broke his resolve. He helped her out of the wet dress, then wrapped her in one of the blankets, rubbing her arms briskly to generate warmth. But it wasn't enough. She was still shaking, her lips tinged blue. "Your dress is wet too," she pointed out. "You'll get sick." "I'm fine." "You're not. You're just being stubborn." She reached for the buttons of his shirt with trembling fingers. "Fair is fair, husband." He caught her hands. "If I take off my clothes, I won't be responsible for what happens next." "Oh, good," Clara said simply. "I don't want you to be responsible. I want you to be warm. I want us both to be warm." Jacob's control snapped. He stripped off his wet clothes with efficient movements, then pulled Clara against him, wrapping them both in the blankets. The heat of his bare skin against hers was like a furnace, driving away the cold in moments. "Better?" he asked, his voice strained. "Much." Clara snuggled closer, her hands exploring the hard planes of his chest. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her palm, could feel the evidence of his desire pressing against her hip. "Clara, you're playing with fire. Maybe I want to get burned," he groaned, a sound of pure need. "You have no idea what you do to me. Show me." What followed was different from their nights in the big house. This was raw and urgent, driven by the storm raging outside and the heat building between them. Jacob made love to her on the narrow bed, his large body covering hers, his scarred hands gentle despite his desperation. "Mine," he growled against her throat. "You're mine, Clara. Say it." "Yours," she gasped. "Always yours." The storm raged for hours, but they barely noticed, lost in each other. By the time the rain stopped and the sun broke through the clouds, they were sated and drowsy, wrapped in each other's arms. "We should head back," Jacob said, but he made no move to release her. "Rosa will worry." 5 more minutes, he chuckled. 5 more minutes. But it was closer to an hour before they finally dressed and mounted their horses. The ride home was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But Jacob kept reaching over to touch her hand, her arm, her shoulder, like he needed the reassurance of her presence. Rosa took one look at them when they walked in, clothes rumpled despite their best efforts, Clara's hair a tangled mess, Jacob's satisfied smile, and shook her head knowingly. "There was a storm," Jacob said. "I see that," Rosa replied dryly. "Must have been quite a storm." Clara felt her face heat, but she couldn't stop the smile that curved her lips. That night, as they lay together in their bed, Jacob traced lazy patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "About what?" "About how lucky I am, about how close I came to spending my whole life alone." His arms tightened around her. "If you hadn't answered that advertisement, if you hadn't been brave enough to come west, if you hadn't looked past the scars," Clara turned in his arms to face him. "But I did, and I'd do it again, Jacob, 1,000 times over." "Why?" The question was raw, vulnerable. "Why did you stay? Really? You could have left that first day. I gave you the chance." Clara thought about it, about that moment when she'd first seen him and felt fear, and then about the moment after, when she'd heard the fear in his voice and realized he was more afraid of her rejection than she was of him. "I stayed because I saw you," she said simply. "Not the scars, not the size, not the reputation. I saw you, Jacob. The man who was trying so hard to be gentle. The man who offered to pay my way back east, even though it would cost him everything. The man who looked at me like I was precious." She cupped his scarred face in her hands. "I stayed because I recognized a kindred spirit, someone who'd been hurt by the world and was still trying to be good anyway." Jacob's eyes glistened in the moonlight. "You saved my life, Clara. You know that, don't you? I was just existing before you came, going through the motions, but you made me want to live again." "You saved mine too," she whispered. "I was so lost, Jacob, so alone. And then I came here, and you made me feel wanted, needed, loved." "You are loved," he kissed her softly. "So incredibly loved." They fell asleep, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in years, Jacob didn't have nightmares. The weeks turned into months, and Clara settled into ranch life with surprising ease. She learned to bake bread the way Rosa taught her, kneading the dough with strong, capable hands. She learned to preserve vegetables and fruits for the coming winter. She learned the names of all the ranch hands, and which ones preferred coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, and which ones took theirs sweet with cream. She learned to read the weather by watching how the cattle behaved, learned to tell time by the position of the sun, learned 1,000 small things that transformed her from a city girl into a ranch wife. And Jacob taught her to ride properly, not just sitting prettily on gentle Daisy, but really ride, galloping across the open plains with the wind in her hair and freedom in her heart. He taught her to shoot, placing a rifle in her hands and showing her how to aim, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger smoothly. "Every ranch wife should know how to protect herself," he said seriously. "Bears, wolves, sometimes men who don't respect boundaries. I need to know you can take care of yourself when I'm not here. But he was almost always there, working close to the house whenever possible, his eyes tracking her movements, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. The ranch hands noticed the change in their boss. Tom, the foreman who'd worked for Jacob's father, pulled Clara aside one day in the barn. "Don't know what you did to him, Mom," the grizzled old cowboy said, "but I ain't seen Jake smile this much since before the fire. Hell, even before the fire, he wasn't this happy. You're good for him." Clara felt warmth spread through her chest. "He's good for me too. That's how it should be," Tom said, nodding approvingly. "That's how it should be." 3 months after their wedding, Clara realized she was pregnant. She told Jacob over dinner, unable to keep the news to herself any longer. He stared at her for a long moment, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. "A baby?" he said finally, his voice strange. "Yes." Clara's hands twisted in her lap. "I know we didn't plan. I mean, it's sooner than we might have wanted," but she didn't get to finish. Jacob was up and around the table in an instant, pulling her out of her chair and into his arms. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. "A baby," he repeated, and his voice was thick with emotion. "Clara, we're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked against his chest. He pulled back just enough to look at her, and she saw tears on his scarred face. "Happy? I don't have words for what I am. I never thought, after Emily left, I thought I'd spend the rest of my life alone. And now I have you, and we're going to have a child." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise. "I love you," he said when he finally pulled back. "God help me, Clara. I love you so much it scares me." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, Jacob. I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to say it." "Afraid? Of what?" "That you wouldn't feel the same. That you only married me because you needed a wife, not because you wanted me specifically." Jacob cupped her face in his scarred hands. "I wanted you from the first moment I saw you step off that stagecoach. Wanted you even when I was sure you'd run screaming. Wanted you even when I was trying to give you space and time. I've wanted you every single day, Clara Winters, and I'll want you every day for the rest of my life." She pulled him down for another kiss, pouring all her love and joy and hope into it. "We're going to be happy," she said when they finally broke apart. "The three of us. We're going to be so happy." "I know," Jacob said. And for the first time since she'd met him, he sounded completely certain, completely at peace. "I know we are." The pregnancy transformed Jacob in ways Clara hadn't expected. He became even more protective, if that was possible, barely letting her lift anything heavier than a teacup. He built her a rocking chair and placed it on the porch where she could sit and watch the sunset. He brought her wildflowers every evening, great handfuls of them that Rosa would arrange in vases throughout the house. "You're going to spoil me," Clara protested one evening as he presented her with yet another bouquet. "That's the idea," he said, settling beside her on the porch and pulling her feet into his lap. He began to massage them gently, his scarred hands surprisingly skilled at easing the aches that came with carrying a child. "What if I get used to this treatment?" she asked, sighing with pleasure. "Then I'll have to keep it up for the next 50 years or so." He grinned at her. "Think you can stand me for that long? I suppose I'll manage." But as her belly grew, so did Jacob's anxiety. He worried constantly. Was she eating enough, sleeping enough? Was the baby moving properly? Should they send for the doctor from town, even though he was 3 days' ride away? One night, about 6 months into the pregnancy, Clara woke to find Jacob sitting on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. "Jacob," she sat up carefully, placing a hand on his shoulder. "What's wrong?" "I'm scared," he said quietly, not looking at her. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you?" Clara's heart clenched. She thought about what he'd told her about his mother dying in a riding accident, about Emily leaving him, about all the loss he'd endured. "You're not going to lose me," she said firmly. "I'm strong, Jacob, stronger than I look. Women die in childbirth all the time out here." His voice was raw. "Good women, strong women. The nearest doctor is days away. If something goes wrong, then Rosa will help me. She's delivered dozens of babies. She told me so herself." "That's not good enough." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were haunted. "I can't lose you, Clara. I can't. You're everything to me. If something happened to you, Clara pulled him close, cradling his head against her shoulder. "Nothing is going to happen to me. I promise." "You can't promise that." "Yes, I can, because I have too much to live for." She took his hand and placed it on her swollen belly. "I have you. And I have our baby, and I have a whole life ahead of me that I'm not ready to give up. So I'm going to be fine, Jacob. We both are." As if in response to her words, the baby kicked against Jacob's palm. He froze, his eyes going wide. "Was that the baby?" Clara confirmed, smiling. "He or she is agreeing with me." Jacob's expression transformed. The fear faded, replaced by wonder. He kept his hand on her belly, feeling the movements of their child. And when he looked up at her again, there were tears on his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For everything. For coming here. For staying. For giving me a family again." He leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her belly. "For making me believe in happy endings." The baby came on a cold February morning, the kind of day when the Montana sky was so clear and blue it hurt to look at it. Clara had been having pains since the night before, but she hadn't wanted to worry Jacob, so she'd kept quiet, hoping they would pass. They didn't pass. By dawn, the pains were coming regularly, and Rosa took one look at her and immediately sent one of the hands to fetch Jacob from the north pasture where he'd been checking on the cattle. Jacob burst into the house, looking wild-eyed and terrified. "Is she?" "She's fine," Rosa said calmly. "The baby is coming, that's all. It's what babies do, Mr. Jacob. Now go boil some water and find me clean towels. I want to stay with her." "You can stay, but I need those towels first." Clara would remember the birth as a blur of pain and effort, and Rosa's calm voice guiding her through it all. But more than anything, she would remember Jacob, sitting at her head, holding her hand, and whispering encouragement, even as she squeezed his fingers hard enough to hurt. "You're doing so well," he murmured, smoothing her sweat-dampened hair back from her face. "So strong, Clara, so brave." "I can't," she gasped during one particularly fierce contraction. "Jacob, I can't do this." "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know. Just a little longer, love. Just a little longer." And then, after what felt like hours but was probably less, there was a new sound in the room. A thin, angry wail that made Clara's heart leap into her throat. "It's a boy," Rosa announced, her lined face creased with smiles. A beautiful, healthy boy. She cleaned the baby quickly and placed him in Clara's arms. He was tiny and red and perfect, with a cap of dark hair and his father's grey eyes. Jacob stared at his son like he'd never seen anything so miraculous in his life. "Can I?" "Of course," Clara said, carefully transferring the bundle into his father's large, scarred hands. Jacob held the baby with infinite care, his hands trembling slightly. "He's so small." "He'll grow," Rosa said, already bustling about cleaning up. "They always do." "Samuel," Jacob said softly. "We should name him Samuel, after my father." "Samuel Winters," Clara repeated, testing the name. "I like it." Jacob couldn't take his eyes off his son. He traced one finger down the baby's tiny cheek, over his perfect little nose, across his rosebud mouth. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Clara, he's absolutely perfect." "Yes," she agreed softly, watching her husband hold their child with such tenderness. "He is." The first weeks with a newborn were harder than Clara had expected. Samuel was a good baby, but he needed constant care, feeding, changing, soothing when he cried. Clara was exhausted, her body still recovering from the birth, and there were moments when she felt overwhelmed by it all. But Jacob was there, always there. He would walk the floors with Samuel at night when the baby wouldn't settle, his deep voice rumbling lullabies that his own mother had sung to him. He changed diapers with the same patient care he showed the newborn calves on the ranch. He brought Clara food and made sure she rested, taking over whenever he could. "You're going to spoil him," Clara said one night, watching Jacob rock their son to sleep. "That's a father's job," Jacob replied, not taking his eyes off Samuel's tiny face. "To spoil his children and make sure they know they're loved." "Did your father spoil you?" "He tried, but I was a stubborn kid, always wanting to prove I could do things myself." He smiled softly. "I hope Samuel inherits his mother's sweet nature instead of his father's hard head." "I hope he inherits his father's strength," Clara said, "and his kindness." Jacob finally looked up at her. "You think I'm kind?" "The kindest man I've ever known." He crossed to the bed and leaned down to kiss her, still cradling Samuel in one arm. "I love you, Mrs. Winters. I love you too, Mr. Winters." As Samuel grew, the house came alive with new sounds, babbling and laughter, and the patter of small feet. The baby thrived in the Montana air, growing strong and healthy under the watchful eyes of his parents and the entire ranch staff, who doted on him shamelessly. Clara watched Jacob with their son and fell in love with him all over again. The way he would get down on the floor to play with Samuel, the way he would carry the boy on his shoulders around the ranch, pointing out cattle and horses and explaining everything with patient detail, the way he would read to him every night, his deep voice turning storybooks into adventures. "You're a wonderful father," Clara told him one evening as they stood in Samuel's room watching their son sleep. Jacob wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I had a lot of years to think about what kind of father I wanted to be. Years when I thought I'd never get the chance. I'm glad you got the chance." "Me too." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Me too, love." 2 years after Samuel was born, Clara found herself pregnant again. This time Jacob was calmer about it, though no less attentive. He'd been through it once and knew what to expect. The second baby, a daughter they named Rose, came into the world on a spring morning when the wildflowers were blooming across the prairie. She was a loud, lusty infant with dark hair and her father's stubborn chin, and from the moment she was born, she had Jacob wrapped around her tiny finger. "She looks like you," Clara said, watching Jacob hold their daughter with the same wonder he'd shown with Samuel. "She's beautiful," he breathed. "Both of them are. How did I get so lucky?" The ranch prospered along with their family. Clara had proven to have a natural head for numbers, and she took over managing the books, freeing Jacob to focus on the cattle and the land. Together, they made the ranch more successful than it had ever been under Jacob's father. They bought more land, expanded the herd, hired more hands. The house was expanded too, with a larger kitchen for Rosa and a proper nursery for the children. Jacob built Clara the library she'd always wanted, lining the walls with shelves and ordering books from back east whenever the supply wagons came through. The children grew. Samuel learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, sitting in front of his father on the big gelding and laughing with delight. Rose was her father's shadow, following him everywhere with determined steps, insisting on helping with chores that were far too big for her small hands. And every evening, when the work was done and the children were asleep, Jacob and Clara would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" Jacob asked one such evening. Clara thought about it. "I miss the libraries sometimes, and the theaters, but I wouldn't trade this for anything. This is home, Jacob. You are home." He tightened his arm around her. "I wake up some mornings and still can't believe this is my life, that you're my wife, that we have 2 beautiful children, that I'm this happy." "Believe it," Clara said softly, "because it's real. All of it." Years passed. The children grew into bright, curious youngsters who ran wild across the ranch under the indulgent eyes of their father and the entire staff. Samuel showed signs of inheriting Jacob's love for the land, always asking questions about the cattle and the horses and how things worked. Rose was fearless, climbing trees and riding horses and declaring she was going to be a cowboy when she grew up, not a cowgirl. The scars on Jacob's hands faded with time, became just another part of him that his children never questioned. To them, their father was simply the strongest, kindest, best man in the world. They never knew about Emily, about the rejection he'd faced, about the years he'd spent alone. They only knew love. The baby came in early spring, a healthy boy with his father's grey eyes and his mother's delicate features. They named him Samuel, after Jacob's father. Jacob cried when he held his son for the first time, his scarred hands so gentle as they cradled the tiny body. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Clara, he's absolutely perfect." Clara watched her husband with their child and felt her heart swell with love. This man who'd been called a monster, this man who'd been rejected and scarred and broken, this man who'd become her whole world. "Yes," she agreed softly, "he is." 2 years later, their daughter was born, a loud, lusty baby with dark hair and her father's stubborn chin. They named her Rose, after Jacob's mother. The ranch prospered. Clara proved to have a head for numbers, and she took over the books, freeing Jacob to focus on the cattle and the land. Together, they built something stronger than either of them could have managed alone. The scars on Jacob's hands faded with time, became just another part of him. Clara still kissed them sometimes, still held them against her face when they lay together in the darkness. They were her favorite hands in the world, strong and gentle and capable of such tenderness. The children grew. Samuel learned to ride almost before he could walk. Rose was her father's shadow, following him everywhere with determined steps. They never feared their father's scars, never thought he was anything but the strongest, kindest man in the world. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the Montana sky stretched endlessly overhead, Jacob and Clara would sit on their porch and remember that day when a frightened mail-order bride had stepped off a stagecoach and met a man who expected to be rejected. "Do you ever regret it?" Jacob asked one such evening, his arm around her shoulders. "Coming out here, marrying a stranger?" Clara leaned into his warmth, breathing in the familiar scent of him, leather and hay and home. "Never," she said firmly. "Not once. Even in the beginning? When you thought I might be a monster?" She smiled, remembering. "Especially not then, because you whispered that you'd never hurt me, and I believed you. And you never did, Jacob. You never did." He kissed the top of her head, his scarred hand finding hers in the darkness. "I love you, Clara Winters. I love you too, Jacob Winters, always." And there, under the vast Montana sky, with their children sleeping safely inside, and their whole future stretching out before them, they knew what it meant to be truly home. Years later, when their grandchildren asked how they met, Clara would smile, that secret smile that still made Jacob's heart skip a beat. "Your grandfather was supposed to be a monster," she'd say, her eyes twinkling, "all scarred and huge and frightening. But do you know what he did when we first met?" The children would shake their heads wide-eyed. "He whispered, 'I'd never hurt you.' And I knew, right then and there, that he was the man I'd been waiting for my whole life. Not a monster at all, but a hero, my hero." And Jacob, his scarred hands now gnarled with age but still gentle, would pull his wife close and whisper in her ear, "You saved me, Clara. You saved me. We saved each other," she'd whisper back. "That's what love does." And it was true. In a harsh land where survival was never guaranteed, they'd found something more precious than gold or cattle or land. They'd found each other, and in finding each other, they'd found home. The ranch would pass to their children, and then to their children's children. But the story would remain, the story of a mail-order bride who saw past the scars, and a broken man who learned to love again. The story of two people who took a chance on each other when the world had given up on them both. The story of a monster who was never a monster at all. Just a man who needed someone to see him, really see him. And Clara had. She always had. That was the true magic of it all. Not the happy ending, though that was wonderful. Not the children or the prosperous ranch or the long years together, though those were blessings beyond measure. The magic was in that first moment when a frightened woman looked at a scarred man and chose to stay, chose to believe, chose to love. Everything else was just the beautiful consequence of that one brave choice. And they lived happily ever after, because some stories deserve nothing less.